So I am delighted this evening to introduce James Merryweather. He's been studying ferns for more than 50 years and particularly is interested in their identification and their ecology. And he's somebody who's really keen to share his knowledge and experience. He's published a number of papers about ferns, but he's probably best known for the Fern Guide and then for his latest well-reviewed guide, which is for British ferns, a field guide, and it's in the Wild Guide series, which probably most of you will know, and it was published in 2020. It's a really comprehensive and engaging photographic guide with new keys, comparison tables, and full of interesting information, so very well recommended. He's also written a couple of other things, a seashore guide, which looked really interesting. I had a quick look at that. And he's researched as well town bands called weights as well. So he's somebody who knows a lot about lots of different things, but it's expertise on ferns that we're going to very happily listen to this evening. And he's got lots of really interesting information to share with us. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen now, and I'm going to hand you over to James.
Right. Do you want me to switch off my camera?
No, you will be okay, actually.
I'll be okay.
It's nice to have you actually
right.
in the recording.
Okay, here we go. Let's fingers crossed, everybody.
Yeah.
Come on. Oh, there we are. Right. So
okay, that looks fine. Yep. Okay. So
happy with that. I've pinched your poster for my title slide. It seemed a waste of time to go making a new one. Here we go. Oh, what then? Now then. Oh, I'm going to have to click on the screen. Right. Yeah, I've been at this a long time. That's me, age 21, with a certain Nigel Pennick. I'm not sure what happened to him, but I found a Nigel Pennick in Cambridge, which is where I came from, where he was at the time. And I don't think those faces match. Mine matches all right, but not his. So I've been with the British Zoological Society for a very long time and never seemed to bother to not to be. It just has been my life since '69. A trip to Arran where I met a load of excellent bods who got us, me and two other chaps, started. So this is my main mentor, Jimmy Dice. Came from Dice near Aberdeen and lived in Loughton, and he was a very kind chap who just nursed us for years and years and years, and was president and secretary of the society for years and years and years and years. And the other main one, some of you may have known him, is Clive Jermy at the Natural History Museum. He was also well known for his Sedge book in the BSBI series, but he was another very generous teacher. Both of them now long gone, I'm afraid. And of course, there were lots and lots of others who I can't feature now. But one I will mention is this Andy Hodges, who was a lecturer at the University of York, where I had my work. And I can't find him any mention of him online, so I can't get a picture of him. But he extracted the Michael from me when we were on a field course in at Millport in the Clyde about my keenness on ferns, and so I scribbled in an old green ring binder a key to try and encourage him to learn something about ferns. And that was really the start of my putting together what I'd been taught by those previous pteridologists into an identification scheme. And so my identification scheme is based on what they taught me. It's rather different from what the textbooks have taught, but this is the way they did it, and this is the way that we young fellas learned. And it worked at the time. So I've, as I say, I've adopted and refined it. So that was the first effort back in around 78. And then learning until 91, when I started teaching. And the Field Studies Council took me on. I can't remember how that happened, but I found myself doing lots of courses from them at various centres, but mostly at the Blencathra Centre in Cumbria. And here we are on the limestone at Steneskew Clouds, which eventually I gave up because it was just too dangerous, really hazardous place to go looking at anything. So as soon as I'd started teaching, the Field Studies Council asked me to write a fern guide. So I did it, and the first edition came out in '92, and now available from Amazon for £274, and it's absolute rubbish. I wish people would tear it up as they would do telephone directories. And there was a second edition, but certainly nobody ever buy this, please. And I did this sideliner, one of their folding cards, which has done quite well. But then at last I had the opportunity to refine the old guide and turn it to something for which I'm now satisfied, and I don't need to do any more to it. So that's the third edition and still available. But this is the one that's come out at the age of 72. Took a long time to get there, but this one I'm very proud of, and I was very fortunate to receive the BSBI President's Award for that publication, an annual publication. And my book stands within a constellation of botany books. It's incredible. I don't believe how fortunate I've been. So I've got two guides with which I'm satisfied. The conventional one with a conventional but friendly dichotomous key, and then the new one which has a novel illustrated key. I wanted it to be a dichotomous. I think it's a good discipline for people to have, but I was overruled by the editor, and he made a lovely job of transcribing it into pictures. So let's have a look at fern structure and identification. And as the title said, we're going to have first steps, just all the basics, and then we're going to do the male ferns, so watch out. So here we are, a lovely picture of a lady fern among the bluebells. This is this time of year up here, and the bluebells are really showing off the ferns at their best. So there are three ways to look at ferns when you're trying to identify them. The first one is to get into your mind whether it's got a creeping or an upright rhizome. We'll look at that a bit more detail later. The second is the architecture of the frond, and the third is the spore-producing organs on the backs, usually on the backs of fronds, and there is a huge diversity there, and that they serve to refine our preliminary identifications. A glossary, so that you know what on earth I'm talking about. We've got the these are very straightforward. I've just put up the captions. You'll know what they mean. I don't need to go and describe it all. And there's the frond. So there's bits of an adult fern. The frond requires a bit more work, perhaps. We have the stipe, which is the stalk that isn't within the blade, and that has scales. And then the rachis here within the blade, and that sometimes does have scales. It depends on the scaliness of the frond. And the costa is the pinna stalk, and it's quite useful to be able to chuck that word out from time to time. It's not one that you start being familiar with, but you soon need to use it. And then the three divisions, the first division of the frond, the pinna, the second division, the pinnule, and then if you've got them, the third division, the pinnulette. And these are all words we really just have to get under our belt before, so that we can then hold conversations with each other. So let's have a look underneath the surface of a frond. Here magnified an area showing the sori, or sorus singular, and here blown up even further. But at this stage it's got a bit fuzzy, but I can boast now I've just obtained one of these things, the tough TG6, which is waterproof and will focus up to pretty well 0 and then zoom. So I'm looking forward to trying it out on some of these chaps. And the great facility of this is focal stacking. So I could go into a section like this and then get much sharper focus. So I'm looking forward to that. Come back next year and we'll see how I've got on. So there's a sorus with its indusium covering it and presumably protecting the sporangia underneath. Here the indusium has started to shrivel, and you can see the ripe sporangia sticking out. They're black at this stage, full of spores and ready to pop. And just to note, this indusium is tucked under. That is going to be useful in male fauna identification. So we, although I'm not sure I'm going to discuss it in any detail today, it will come in handy because the one of the other male ferns, the common one, the indusium is loose and flappy, but we'll leave that behind and move across here to where the sporangia are starting to pop. So the indusium is now out of the way and the sporangia are drying out, and through a magnificent mechanism are chucking the spores out until they finish up all empty and the spores have been popped into the atmosphere. And just to remind you where they came from. So the spores are in the sporangia, which are in the sori, which are on the backs of the fronds usually, but there are certain ones which disobey that rule, more the primitive ferns. Here's Drypsis filix mass. You can see how the indusium here is loose, and if we look at it when it's a bit more mature, but look at one of the other male ferns, it's tucked under. So there's a very significant difference there. Just a hint to get you going. And when the sori are ripe, or the sporangia, off go the spores, leaving us with the empty capsules and a mess. The spores are in the atmosphere, but this on a frond underneath this one it's covered with the sporangia, which are broken away from here, and they just appear as a coarse dust. And these are the things that confuse beginners when they're sowing spores, because they've got them in an envelope, having dried the piece of frond out in an envelope and got the spores to dehisce, and they sow the sporangia and throw the spores away, which is rather a pity. So that's, yeah, moving on. So spores take quite a number of different formats. I'm grateful to Google for this picture. And they germinate, and the whole of the reproductive system starts. This is quite a nice diagram. It's the best one I found. Unfortunately, it's Spanish, so the translations have been a wee bit wonky. Esporafate and the prothallus not quite named right, but if you ignore the Spanishness, it's a jolly good diagram. So now moving on to identification, now that we've done the glossary. And we start with a serious warning. Well, you'll see how it pans out. When I was developing from the scribbled key for Andy Hodges to the official key of the Field Studies Council, I was not alone. There was an editor who put a lot of pressure on me, and I've never I've never forgiven him, I've never forgotten the lessons he taught me. It was really very fundamental to my construction of keys, but at the time it was a real headache, because I had to rewrite the whole set of keys to avoid these 4 difficulties. Couplets must be couplets. Couplets must be individually mutually exclusive. the characters must not include any subjective comparisons, and the characters must be available, or if not, confirmatory only. And those are 4 mistakes that you'll find in dichotomous keys from the best biologists. But Steve got me out of it. So here's one example, having 5 different sections in a couplet, and it needs to be a cascade of couplets like that in order that the eye can just work its way through, and it's much easier to get to an identification that way and not make mistakes. The second one, couplets must be mutually exclusive. It's no good if you give a habitat and then the opposite is what the fronds are like. And similarly, this is a bit more subtle. Both looking at the pinnule apex, but it just says one is rounded and one is toothed. So is the rounded one toothed? Is the toothed one rounded or square or what? Doesn't say. So that's another important feature we need to apply. Characters must not include vague comparisons. This first one, plant medium height or plant tall, tells you nothing. Scales on the rachis, dark yellowish or somewhat golden. These actually occur in keys. And what on earth do you do with them? And then the scales are dense or they're quite sparse. Hopeless. So if you're going to do it, you've got to be more precise. And if they're as subjective as this, you really have to help the user. Whoa, what happened there? Whoops. And here, the characters must be available. So it's no use having the inducium behavior as the sporangia swell and mature if it's the wrong time of year. So we have in August, the indusia split radially in one of the ferns. In another, they shrivel, and in another, well, this is too early. You can't see what they do as they're maturing. So in June or here in May, it's an absolutely useless dichotomy and needs to be avoided. So those are the 4 really serious problems that occur with keys. And if the key is intelligible, it doesn't work, it's probably not your fault. So don't blame yourself if you can't make an identification. It's very often the key compiler who either is incompetent or he doesn't want you, or she doesn't want you to make an identification. And there are such taxonomists about. So now to continue with identification proper. The first one, the rhizome format. Is it a creeping rhizome like this, which is traveling along the ground or just under the surface, or is it a compact one compressed vertically? And we can tell straight away just by looking at them. So the 2 top ones here, the fern is forming a shuttlecock because it's got the upright rhizome, and the 2 below is a creeping rhizome with the fronds coming off at intervals in lines. So that's easy enough to do. It's not built into the key at the beginning, but it does help you with our identifications. Frond diversity is the thing that we really rely upon. And as you can see here, there are huge differences, which I'll just run through. It's the number of times by which a frond is divided. So we have 0, as in the hart's tongue, once divided, as in the polypodes, twice, as in this one, which is the lemon scented, 3 times in the buckler ferns, and then 3 times 3 in bracken and oak ferns. And we can use all those as identification codes, either 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And here we've got A, B, C, D, E, which is the outline, the shape of the frond. And we record the 2 of those, and that will take us to the right key. So here we go, how to use these keys. And I've put both of these up, but I'm going to concentrate obviously on this one eventually. But we first of all determine that there are not any of 4 unlike ferns, or first of all, that it's a fern and not one of the other things which we call fern allies, and they really are different sorts of plants, the horsetails and the club mosses and so on. And there are 4 unfern-like ferns, pilbert, American water fern, and so on. We just get rid of those by just thinking them out of the way, and then turn to pages 28 to 29 in the case of this book, and 40 in the case of this one. And you've got the same system, because it's my system, taught to me by Jimmy Dice and company all those years ago, and formalized. So this will help you to ascertain which key you need to follow. It should always be your starting point until you become familiar. And once you've got familiar with the process, you will skip past this, because you'll know which family to go to or which part of the key to go to. But until you do that, that's your starting point for the ferns. And you go through it. You made a mental note of the rhizome format. These 2 features then take you to the key, or the key to keys, which will give you directions to 4 different keys. And you will bear in mind, because you've been looking at the fern very closely, what its sori are like. And so there, we've gone through that process. That takes you to the key, which is all done in pretty pictures, and it does seem to be very easy to use. A lot of new pteridologists have found this very easy to use, so satisfying, and it's passed lots of testing, just like the Field Studies Council guides are tested to destruction, so this one was. And then that takes you to the species pair of pages, where you've got a silhouette, you've got a habit picture, you've got close-up of a frond, and you've got the sori and a description. Oh, and of course the very important distribution map, because if you're here, you wouldn't expect to find the lanceolate spleenwort, although it is just over here. But let's say you're over there. No, you wouldn't. Oh, I've done it again. So a quick cook's tour of the British ferns, not all of them, but just a load of pretty pictures, and starting with an argument. Are these ferns? They don't look much like it. The 3 adder's tongues and the moonwort are weird looking beasts, and they've been called ferns for centuries. But are they? Now, this paper in 2004 by Pryor et al. Was the first to do a full DNA sequencing on all of the pteridophyta and associated groups. And they came up with this magnificent cladogram, which changed pteridology entirely and for the better. So we're going here from ancient to modern, and these are the modern ferns. And so just a picture of a modern fern. Here we see the horsetails, which are evidently outside the modern ferns, but a long way further outside, and with an earlier origin, we have those club mosses, which seem to have fossil ancestors going right back to the Devonian, which is exciting. And then still pretty primitive, these things, the whisk ferns, which now Wagner and Bierhorst, not Wagner, this is Wagner, Herb Wagner, a fine American pteridologist who used to argue with Bierhorst about whether this whisk fern, Psilotum nudum, was a grown-up xylophyte from the Devonian or a reduced fern. And this study settled it. Unfortunately, they were both dead by then, so they couldn't row anymore. But this study settled the fact that these are indeed very ancient descendants of very ancient plants. And right next door, we have the adder's tongues and moonworts. Right next door, not settled in with the ferns. They're in the same clade as those whisk ferns. So I think we can cross out the word fern because this is just showing the true ferns, and they're outside, and they're further outside, in fact, than the horsetails. So the horsetails are more closely related to the ferns than they are to the things that used to be called ferns. You decide. Why have I put that slide in? Let's move on. Yes, so here's the shore horsetail with my local castle, Elandonnan, in the background. This is only 3 miles up the road from where I'm sitting now, and it's the one that featured in the BBC's balloon floating over countryside film at the beginning of programs. So it's not a fern. So are these ferns? I think we can say that Pryor showed that they certainly are not. But we'll keep them because they're fabulous plants. So now to the true ferns, and starting with the filmy ferns, they are so beautiful. This is very, very rare. And these guys, this one is not very common. This one's very common up here and in the Lake District and in various damp places. And they're all very beautiful. But here we can see that they are reasonably far back in the evolutionary line. They're quite primitive. I'm not going to refer to Pryor again, so you can rest from that academic stuff. Just look at the ferns now. And these are the 3 polypodes we have. And they are, we've got the western one, the interjectum, which is the result of hybridization of those 2. And we'll look at that here. Here are our 3 polypodes, vulgare, cambricum, and interjectum. Cambricum is the basic ancestor. And here is a fairly ancient one, which is the result of the hybridization of 2 ancestral species which no longer inhabit this part of the world. They are in the United States, so maybe this happened before the continents separated. That's something that we do need to understand a bit better. And then we've got the 3rd one, the derived extant species. And all 3 of those will hybridize. So we've got one between vulgare and interjectum, one between interjectum and cambricum, and this one, which is an important one, between cambricum and vulgare, which is a triploid, so it's infertile, but it has been known to double its chromosomes, and that makes a new species, which might have happened many, many times over the past thousands or even 1 million years. We don't know, but this is the most diverse, and it looks to me as if it's achieved its diversity by being the result of several different hybridization events. We shall see. So in the book, we offer you not only the key, but also a table, because these things are devilishly difficult. There are huge overlaps between their appearance. And so here we give you a table to work things out from. Next, the Adiantaceae. Here's Adiantum, the maidenhair fern, very familiar to all. This little thing, the Jersey fern, I've actually photographed this in Madeira, or was it Corfu? But it's very northernmost range in the Channel Islands, and parsley fern, which is really common on acidic rocks in North Wales, the Lake District and so on. Here we have the 2 brackens that have so far been sorted out in this country. Maybe you didn't know about this one. It occurs at very few sites, perhaps only one near Aviemore. So don't get overexcited, but I got taken to see it, and so I'm rather keen on it. Here, the Cystopteridaceae. Here's Cystopteris itself and its relative, the oak fern, Gymnocarpium dryopteris, a pretty little thing growing just up the road from here underneath a wee birch tree. And there's the whole range of the species within that family. And here another wide-ranging family, the Aspleniaceae, the spleenworts, and there's loads of those. and a huge diversity in frond shapes. So you're going to come to your aspleniums by many different routes in the key, but as long as you stick to what you're being told, you'll get there. Here are the three lady ferns, the common one, which is everywhere and is a weed in gardens in this part of the world. And here the mountain one and its close relative, the flexile lady fern, both rather rare, getting rarer because they're dependent upon snow patches high on mountains, and those are disappearing with climate change. So we could lose these two species quite rapidly. The Pteridaceae, the mountain or lemon-scented fern, and the beautiful beech fern. And here, just showing the comical way in which this one's fronds unravel, which they're doing at this very moment. And then the marsh fern, which occurs in places where you need wellies. Here are very common species, the hard fern, now no longer Blechnum spicant, I'm sorry, it's now Struthiopteris, which means ostrich fern. And it's not the ostrich fern that gave it its name, it's another, and it's just had to accept it because of taxonomic conventions. And that has two different sorts of frond. Right, dipping into the difficult. And this is the Dryopteridaceae, which we haven't looked at yet. And there are three main groups. There are the Polisticums, of which there are only three, and they're not too difficult, but you need to get the hang of them. So we provide, oh yeah, they're the Dryopteris-like ferns, which are the tripinnate ones and the bipinnate ones, the buckler ferns and the male ferns. And when I was at this age, me and my colleagues of a similar age used to say, we can't do the Dryopteris-like ferns. We had to. And 54 years later, the male ferns are still giving us headaches, as you shall see. So here are the three British shield ferns, and here they are as photographs, which shows that this one is, though it's rare, it's easy to sort out with its very simple pinny, and these two are common but rather tricky, but they can be separated once you get your eye in, and we offer a guide to that. Here are the main features, and once you get your eye around these things, you'll just be making snap judgments. And then the buckler ferns and the male ferns, and I've made a video called Made Less Difficult, because they do present some terrible problems. The buckler ferns are somewhat easier than the male ferns. We've got 6 species, but 2 of them have very special characteristics. It's these 2 here, which this one here is rare and locally common on limestone, and this one is rare and very rare and occurs only in fen, and it's dying because fen is being drained left, right, and centre. It's in a terrible state, restricted really to a few conservation areas now. So we'll just let those go because we can identify them by where we are and what they're doing. So then we're left with 4. These 2 and these 2 are quite easy to tell apart, but these 2 are not. But there are ways of doing it, and so again we've made a table so that they can be sorted out other than by key. We've got choices of the way of identifying. Then the male ferns. There used to be 2, then there were 3. Recently there have been 5, but 4 of them were subspecies, or 3 of them were subspecies. Then they became species, and now we've got 3 more species and 2 more waiting to become species, and they all look pretty well the same. So there's a lot of hard work to be done there, and we do our best. The origins of them are pretty complicated, and that's just dealing with the first 5. I won't test you with that. You can read it up in the book if you care to buy it. but they are keyed, so we enable you to do so. Now, I said every couplet must be a couplet, and in the case of these three, it just didn't work. It was reasonable to make the three, just that one exception. But then added to the key, we have a table of characters, two sets of characters. One, this upper lot, definable and quantifiable, pretty more or less. Yes, you can quantify these, but then you've got these ones for just for qualification, and they're subjective. They're those ones that are various forms of brown, various or golden, various forms of density of scales and so on, which I've tried to quantify but not got there really. And then this important advice from dear Chris Page, the old man of nowadays, the old man of pteridology. He didn't used to be. He and I are about the same age, I think. And he wrote this magnificent book, apart from the New Naturalist book, of course, but this one contains virtually all the information you need, all the technical information you need, and good illustrations and so on, as a textbook. It's not a coffee table book or something to stick in your backpack. But he did issue this advice about the male ferns, saying that if you're going to identify them properly, you need to assess a symphony of characters. You don't just go for one characteristic or two or three and then say, I know what it is. You have to do a symphony, and very often you just have to walk on by, and therefore we've invented the term WOB, which means I can't do it. Come on, everybody, let's just walk on. And when he wrote this, he said a very complex species. In fact, it's become a very complex since then. But there we are. You can use that key to get that symphony of characters, the guide there. And the reason we have these problems with male ferns is the reason we have problems with dandelions, brambles, white beams, hawkweeds, and so on. They are all apomictic, that is, they can reproduce without sex, and they're undergoing rapid evolution and rapid speciation, a massive speciation. Anybody who's attempted to split these things will know just how much of a minefield each of them is. In fact, there's only one man who can do the dandelions, Richards at Newcastle, I think he is. Nobody else can do them the way he can. Yes. So Chris's book, absolutely highly recommended if you can afford it. And the prices are, now these are rather small now, but it's about 50, 70 or more pounds, £90.58, I think it says there. So it's rather expensive for an out-of-print book, but it's absolutely worth it if you're going to be a competent pteridologist. And he did write a first edition, which is almost as expensive and much worse. So we don't recommend that. Just don't buy that. Save up and get the new, the newer edition, the 1997. And then, of course, you've got this one turned up in the same search. It's already secondhand. I recommend it, and it is available, and it's cheap. With the male ferns, we have a number of pages just showing comparisons of important features, and particularly the sori are full of massive differences, which, if you can assess them properly and at the right time, they do help with identifications. So at a Cook's tour of the male ferns, the mountain one, which is here photographed at about 1,000 to 1,500 feet on Bialach na Barn near Applecross in the Highlands. And you might be able to see that the pinnae are concave and crispy. And here it is growing in a churchyard in Grange in Borrowdale. I really thought that was some other male fern, but we've checked it many, many times, and it turns out to be a huge version of this little fern, which is generally much smaller than the others. The common male fern, if you did A-level biology when I did it, that was the fern that was used for discussing reproduction. And here it is in woodland, looking much darker green. Here, the golden male fern, very characteristic at this time of year because of this bright yellow with a ginger streak of scaliness down the whole stalk. But then later on in the season and under shade, it turns quite dark green. Here, Borer's male fern, much more delicate than the other ones, or certainly more delicate than Aphinis, the one before, with these square pinnules with teeth on, little teeth like someone says it like cat's ears, and that is has a slender stalk, so the fronds tend to arc over sideways like that. It's not showing in this picture so much, but it did in that one. Then the narrow scaly male fern, a difficult one to sort out, is very variable. But when the fronds sit upright, the pinnae swivel around to the horizontal rather dramatically. And here they're halfway in a semi-vertical frond. And also note that the pinnule next to the rachis is much longer than the adjacent, which is helpful in diagnosis. Now, no common name, Dryopteris pseudocomplexa, whisk parsnip. It's known from Arran and from these three plants near Dunvegan on the Isle of Skye. Very convenient for me to go and have a look at it, which was rather nice. But it's a subject of a lot of discussion at the moment. Similarly, Dryopteris pseudodisjuncta, which also grows only 10 minutes from my home on this road going down to the wee place called Stromeferry across the loch from Loch Carron. And this is remarkable. Oh, that's just to show a comparison with the golden male fern. This is, well, it's too difficult. But when you turn the fronds over, there's a distinct difference because the sori here, the indusia split in Aphinis, and in pseudodisjuncta, they shrivel. So there is a difference between them. And here are the two, here is the plant here in September last year, and here after the first frost, which absolutely wiped out the pseudodisjuncta and left the Aphinis untouched. And that didn't catch the frost until a lot later in the year. So there is another difference which I want to investigate between the phenologies of these plants. And here this spring, there we are last November when the frost hit. Here we are in spring. This is that same plant, and it's way ahead of the Aphinis growing next door. Phenology seems to be something we could look into. And this one, I understand it's in my garden, Dryopteris lacunosa. It needs to be checked. And here are some comparisons. I don't think we want to go into that. It's far too tricky, and I'll report to you next year or the year after. But again, the phenology, here's one of the ancestral male ferns. Here, the golden one, but a crested variety. And here, flushing a month later, what we're calling Dryopteris lacunosa, there is a difference. Hybridization happens a lot in the ferns and the horsetails, but I'll look at only one just to give you a taste, and that's the hybridization of the hard shield fern and the holly fern, which often grow together on limestone. And here we have the hybrid Polystichum illyricum, which is very rare, but at a site in Assynt, right in the high highlands, there are hundreds of them, and I don't understand this. Hybrids are supposed to be sterile, and so I don't know what's going on there. I found another single plant on limestone not far from here. So introduction to a hybrid. And Here is the holly fern seen close to with its simple pinnules. Here, the hard shield with its individual pinnules, and here, semi-fused. So half and half. If you want to do revision, by all means have a look at the recording of this, which seems to, I'm going to turn this talk into a YouTube video to go on my channel, which already has 4 ferny videos, including the male and buckler ferns, if you want to follow up on those. And there will be a welcome for everybody in the British Pteridological Society. And you don't, those of you who live in London don't have far to go because it's in your own museum. And there are some excellent people there who will welcome members with open arms. And so just one last thing, bit tongue-in-cheek. Lady fern and male fern, the common male fern, have this name, Dryopteris filix mass, Aetherium filix mass, which means male fern, lady fern. But people often say Felix, and that doesn't mean fern. And so if you find somebody saying that, such as it's Antherium felix femina, tell them off. And that's all. Thank you.
Thank you so much, James. That was really, yeah, that was brilliant. If you could want to stop sharing your screen now, and then we'll go and see if we can pick up a couple of questions. That's perfect. Right. That was great. Yeah,
how long was it?
Yeah, that's fine. That was a really
not too
nice.
Bad. Yeah, because I had no idea.
Yeah, that's fine. You did that really well. And you gave us a really helpful kind of overview, I think, survey of all the different species. I thought it was really interesting, the kind of work explaining about the phylogeny and about the evolution, and interesting to kind of think about how the hybridization has worked and how that links up to the production of different species.
That's fascinating.
Yeah, really very, very interesting. And obviously, if people haven't got the book and are interested in ferns, that looks like a unmissable publication. So yeah, please, I mean, we can kind of send out details when we do the follow-up email, but you know, it certainly really looks worth looking at. And maybe just make sure I've got the link to your YouTube channel.
Yes, I'll send
that through me, and then I can kind of circulate that to everybody as well. But yeah, really fascinating, and I liked the little sound effects that we had popping up from time to time, and the humour in it. So that was great. Thank you very much. So I'm going to go over to you now, Anko. Is there a couple of questions to pick up from the chat?
No. We have Carolyn Cohen, who mentioned that Professor Wagner was her supervisor when she did her degree in botany.
Did she know Suzanne Copter?
I don't know. Carolyn, do you want to unmute yourself?
Yeah, if you want to unmute yourself and say hello, that'd be great.
I went astray.
Is that Carolyn Cohen? We can ask
Carolyn
her.
Cohen, yeah.
I mean, not if you're shy, you don't have to. But if
Never
you'd like
mind.
to, that would be
Hello,
great.
Carolyn. Hello. Yeah, I've heard that Herb Wagner was a really nice guy, and his student, who was a Mexican, who, oh, never mind. We can get into huge detail, but they were quite a crew over there. And Suzanne is a friend of mine. She's now back in the States. She was over here to do her research years ago.
Can I just ask you something about the inducium, the form of the inducium? Do different forms reflect any difference in the way the spores are kind of released? Is there some, because obviously some are much more kind of enclosing than others. Is there some reason for those sort of differences?
We see it mostly in the male ferns. The rest of them are pretty standard. The inducium shrivels up and falls off.
Right.
Or in the case of the spinwerts, it shrivels and parts. But in the male ferns, they all have a very, no, hang on a minute. One of them is loose and flappy and very thin and shrivels and falls away, mostly, not completely. The other 4, assuming we're only talking about 4, have a tucked under inducium, which then has to do several things in order to let this sporangia swell. So in aphanis, in which it's very thick, it splits because it can't lift, it can't shrivel.
Yeah.
In the mountain male fern, it lifts and then develops a circumferential constriction, makes it look like a mob cap.
Right.
But it's still too thick to shrivel. And then in the others, there are various forms of shriveling, including rolling up, like looking like a chanterelle, which is a characteristic of boreri. So there's always overlap, unfortunately, but as long as you look at this, as Chris Page said, this symphony of characters, then you can reach a reasonable diagnosis. And if you can't, you walk on by, you wob.
I certainly like that approach as well. That's you know, it's not a bad approach.
Just put it out of your mind and go and look at another one.
Go on to something else. Anchor, I can see there's quite a few questions all popping through now. So do you want to pick up a couple of others?
Hold on, let me unmute myself. That always helps. Yep. So JK was asking, have British ferns recovered from the Victorian collecting frenzy?
No.
No.
Some of them haven't, but the common ones have just carried on, and they're more subject to problems like drainage and agriculture and other forms of destruction that we've introduced since the Victorians. They collected, we destroy. This is a good place to live.
Well, Andrew was wondering, do fern species spread a lot worldwide because the spores get transported by wind?
That's terribly interesting, and I can use an example. I don't know is the answer, but several years ago, a maidenhair fern called Adiantum eluticum, which is a North American species, turned up on some Lochside limestone just north of here at Kishorn, and we watched it for several years and puzzled over it. First of all, we had to identify the thing, but once we got that settled, I went one year to go and say hello to it, and it had gone. Somebody had nicked it, and it was private, but I mean, it was not the sort of thing that a passerby would spot. So I don't know what happened there, but that evidently there's no gardens nearby. So did it come from America? Oh, there is another one in Ireland. There's a wee fern which is now included in the second edition of the Wild Guide. I'm not going to try and remember its name. It's a tiny, insignificant little thing, only a matter of a couple of inches, and that is found only in one valley in Killarney and on 2 Caribbean islands. And it's not the sort of fern that anybody would bother to plant in their garden to produce spores. So that almost certainly either has been there for the last 50 million years or something, or it's flown across the Atlantic.
That's amazing.
That caused an awful lot of excitement among Irish botanists.
I can imagine. And we've probably got time for just 1 or 2 more questions. So is there just a couple of other things we can pick up?
Yeah, I'm going to pick up on one of the questions because it relates to gardens. So there was a question, are there any native ferns you'd recommend for growing in a garden in Kent, if you'd recommend that at all?
Yes, but go to a specialist grower and buy them, because we have not only the wild types but loads of fabulous varieties. And yes, have them in the garden by all means. Have a garden like I've got, or there are some maniacs who have got far more than I have. But there are quite a number of specialist growers. I can perhaps send Maria a copy or a scan of the back cover of our magazine, which has got them all listed, all those who care to participate. And Kent is a very likely place to find them, I would think. Southeast there are lots of enthusiasts, but I'm not quite sure where, but we can deal with that.
Yeah, we've already got people who are popping in the chat that they'd be keen on that. So yeah, if you let me have the details, that'd be great. I can again circulate those. So Anchor, I think we're going to have to maybe have one very last final question, and then we'll need to finish off. So is there one last thing you'd like to pick up?
Yeah, there's another question. How long do individual plants persist? Do they wear out over time?
We don't know, or I don't know, and I don't think anybody's had a life long enough to check it out. And of course, the royal fern is the one that really comes to mind, because we do get plants with a rhizome a cubic meter in size, and that must have been going for several hundred years. I think Chris Page knows better than I do about this. They do a lot of them last a long time, but it might be that some of them are longer lasting than others. So for instance, I think the lady fern might be a quite short-lived thing, but then she's terribly fecund, and turns up all over our gardens here.
So anyway, I mean, lots of people are popping their appreciation into the chat. People saying, you know, it was very informative, but also really very entertaining talk as well. So, and I'd kind of concur with that. It was fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing all your evident enthusiasm and your expertise with us. And what we'll do is there'll be a follow-up email, which will let everybody know when the recording's available. But into that, I'll put any of the kind of links that you send. People want details of your books, so we'll make sure we kind of add those in. The link to the list of fern supplies will be great, and make sure we've got details of your YouTube channel as well. So thank you once again, and anybody who would like to express their appreciation with a clap, you're most welcome to unmute yourself and to do that before we go. Just to let you know as well that the next talk for the LNHS is on the 16th of June, and that will be Mark Spencer's next, hopefully he'll be available this time, his next talk, which will be Streets, Railways and Brown Fields in his series looking at different habitats to be found around London. I'm afraid there's no castles and locks, but unlike James's local area, but that will be fascinating as well. James, do you have anything coming up? Any talks or anything you've got kind of coming up that you want to mention?
No, I've just begun working on a seashore guide for the wild guides. So and I recommend wild guides. Some of them they are fantastic. The bird book, and I'm not a bird person, but the bird book is just an absolute gem. And there are lots of other good ones. And another thing I'd say is, if people find themselves coming up to the Highlands and Skye and Loch Alsh, look out Skye and Loch Alsh Environment Forum, contact them. That'll get through to me and my colleagues, and we'll take you out and show you stuff.
Wow.
Whatever you're interested in. My colleague Roger is a mammal man. He does the badgers and the otters and the voles and things. I do the plants, and we've got various people, and we're always wanting to show off, particularly our Loch Eshort, where the biodiversity in that is amazing. So if you come when there's a low spring tide, bring your wellies and come with us, and we'll show you 11 species of crab on one shore.
Wow,
it's phenomenal.
That's amazing.
So
yeah, so thank you very much
while it's
for
still
that.
Here.
Yeah, hopefully that, yes, I hope you're all jotting that down, everybody, and some of you will be able to take advantage of that. It's a really lovely offer. Thank you so much, and we do look forward to finding out, you know, when your seashore guide. I know these things take time, but
yeah,
you know, be lovely.
It'll be around before long. Yeah.
Yeah, perfect. And maybe we'll get you back to have a chat about that possibly in the future, if that's possible as well.
Yeah, that would be.
Yeah. But thank you once again, and please everybody, if you'd like to unmute yourself and to